Welcome to our weekly class in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. We're up to the second chapter, Mishnah 7. And as we discussed many times, every Mishnah is connected to the one before, although it's also something that could be studied independently. One could also look for and find connections to what we did before. He starts off with saying, he used to say. Who's this he? This he is Hillel. A few paragraphs before this, it quoted Hillel, and then every time Hillel said something different, it says he used to say. So this is attributed to Hillel. What was the last thing that Hillel said? This is where he saw a corpse floating on the water, and he said, you were drowned because you drowned someone else, and those who drowned you ultimately will be drowned. In other words, he's saying, among other things, that there are consequences of your actions. Don't think that you can do things and nothing will happen, no consequences. There are always consequences. Although our primary reason for doing good is not because it brings good consequences and negative things bring negative consequences, even if it would be the other way around. If God would tell us, if you do a mitzvah, you go to hell. If you do a sin, you go to paradise. We would still do the mitzvah. It just so happens that it doesn't work that way. It works the more...
No one said that because it was the opposite?
But even if it would be that way, even if God would tell us that there are negative consequences for doing good and positive consequences for evil, we would still do good and reject evil. That explains, maybe we're not close to Purim, but I can still say something about Purim. On Purim it says we're supposed to drink and become so intoxicated we no longer know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai, which of course is a very enigmatic statement. That means that you should get so drunk that you start blessing the villain and cursing the hero. But one of the different meanings is that on Purim we come to a point where the consequences of us doing right, that it brings blessing, is no longer relevant. The consequences of doing evil is negative happenings, is no longer relevant. We do good because it's right. We refrain from evil because it's wrong. And we don't care about the consequences in terms of our basic attachment to doing what's right and not doing what's wrong. However, once you accept that premise that right is right no matter what the consequences, you do a mitzvah and you get blamed for it. Someone accuses you of something when you do a mitzvah. You still say, I did the mitzvah not because I wanted the fame, I wanted the acclaim, I wanted the reward. I did it because it's the right thing. God wants me to do this. So you don't care about the consequences, but once you do the right thing, you also want to see the good and the consequences. You want to see how good begets good and evil begets evil. So that's the gist of the last Mishnah about consequences. And on that note, he continues to say, he shows how certain types of behavior, negative behavior begets negative consequences, and positive behavior produces positive consequences. And he used to say the following, and he points out 5 different things over here. First on the negative side, and then on the positive side. The more flesh, the more worms. It simply means the more we eat, the more the body grows, the more the worms or the maggots will have what to eat once we're no longer in this world. We're having lunch, Rabbi. What?
Yeah, we're having lunch.
Don't let his lecture disturb you.
The more property, the more wealth you have, the more anxiety, the more worries you have. The more wives, the more witchcraft. In those days, many of the women were into witchcraft. In fact, when the Torah talks about how a witch performing witchcraft is a capital crime, it uses a feminine term, machashefa, not mechashef. And Rashi quotes the Talmud that says the reason why the Torah uses the feminine is because it's more common, witchcraft is more common among females than it is among males. I don't know if that's still the case, But the definition of witchcraft over here does not necessarily mean hocus pocus. It means using devious ways of getting the attention of your husband. And there's a rivalry over here.
Abraham had 4 wives.
He had 2, well, maybe 3.
To get the attention.
Right, and Jacob had 4. And King Solomon had 1,000.
Did witchcraft come in?
With Solomon, it messed up his life, and they caused problems. Yes, we'll get into polygamy a little bit later. That'll come later. Let's just go through these.
Four Abraham's wives.
Sarah, Hagar, and then after Sarah died, it says he married a woman called Keturah. According to Rashi and other sources, Keturah is another name for Hagar. It's the same one, so it's 2. But other commentators say, no, it's a 3rd wife. So he had 2 or 3. And Jacob had 4. And Isaac had 1. And Moses had 1. Although some say he had 2. But most say that he only had 1 wife. But we'll get into polygamy a little bit later. What?
Moshe was too busy with God to have another. He didn't have time to separate.
And he was separated from his wife. Okay, so the more wives, the more witchcraft, the more female slaves, the more lewdness, the more slaves, male slaves, the more robbery. So those are the 5 negatives. More flesh, more property, more wives, more female slaves, and more male slaves. But now the parallel to that in the realm of goodness, in the realm of spirituality, but the more Torah, the more life. The more sitting in the company of scholars, the more wisdom. The more counsel, the more understanding. We'll soon see what that means. The more charity, the more peace. If one acquires a good name, he has acquired something for himself. If one acquires for himself knowledge of Torah, he has acquired life in the world to come. So it's 5 or 6 different items over here. I would like to suggest that the 5 spiritual parallel the 5 physical. But before we do that, one of the commentators, known as the Bartanura, says that these go in order. A person wants to indulge in physical things like food, like eating. So that's the first thing. Then a person decides that he needs to support his behavior. He needs more money. So he gets involved in purchasing property. Once he has all this property, he feels he can now marry more than 1 wife. He has enough money to support more than 1 wife. But once you have many wives, you need many maidservants to attend to them. The more maidservants, the more money you have to make to support them, so you buy more property. The more property, you need more workers, and you take advantage of slave labor. So one thing builds on the other. But these 5 parallel the 5 positive ones. Let's go in order. The first of the positive ones, the first of the negative ones is the more flesh. The more one indulges in physical activities. Eating meat, flesh or meat is just a metaphor or a symbol for more indulgence in material pursuits and material pleasures. What's the parallel to that? The parallel to that is Torah study. Because what food is to the body, that nurtures the body, you can't live without it, that's what Torah is to the soul. When a person studies Torah, Torah is like food to the soul. King David himself, when he talks about the study of Torah, he says, your Torah, he speaks to God, is in my intestines. What he meant by that is, just like when you eat food, you digest it, and it becomes part of you. The same thing when you study Torah, it becomes part of you. It's your food, it's your sustenance. Ki heim chayenu v'orech yameinu, we say in our prayers, because Torah is the length of our days. That's what gives us life, and that is what sustains us. So that's the first parallel. You want to increase material things, that is not going to end good. It's not going to be positive. You want to increase in spiritual things, that will end positive. Let me just backtrack a little bit. if you have to think about what this Mishnah is telling us, this Mishnah is giving us a few basic messages. It's contrasting between physical and spiritual matters. In the physical domain, more is less. More is always less. So let's say if a person is a millionaire and he wants to become a billionaire, does that mean it's less? It depends what you do with $1 billion. If your $1 billion are spent on personal benefits and pleasure, then more is less. If the $1 billion is spent on giving more charity and helping more people, then more is no longer physical, it becomes spiritual. So more is more. So that's one major lesson, that in the physical realm, more is less. In the spiritual realm, more is more. Another thing, in the physical domain, there's a law of entropy. That means the more you expend energy on something, the less you have left. If you have $100 and you spend $50, you don't have $100 anymore. If you eat a large piece of food, you have less food. You have to acquire more. It doesn't grow. In spiritual matters, it's the other way around. The more energy you spend on spiritual matters, the more energy you have. You never exhaust the amount of spiritual energy that you have. The more you spend, the more you have. That's in the spiritual realm. So let's go on. The more property, the more anxiety. That's the negative. When a person has a lot of property, a lot of wealth, they have to worry. Make sure that it's preserved, that it's not lost, that it's not destroyed, that no one steals it. So what's the parallel to that? The parallel to that is the more sitting in the company of scholars. In other words, Torah study, even if you study Torah by yourself on a very superficial, very limited level, it gives you life. But if you want to prosper, your Torah study has to be more than just perfunctory study. Once in a while, getting a little bit of Torah, you have to sit. Sitting means not just physically sitting. Sitting means you're stationary. You establish yourself there together with other scholars, and there's a give and take. There's a lively debate. You go into, I mentioned this many times, you go into a yeshiva where they study Torah, there can be 500 people in the room, and everyone is talking at the top of their voices. Everyone is screaming and shouting and arguing with its fellow. There's so much life and energy there, and that's what not only gives you life, but that also preserves your life. When you have in-depth Torah study, it increases, not only does it increase your knowledge, it increases your desire for knowledge. You see, in Hebrew, one of the words for money, in Hebrew there are a few words for money. One of them is kesef. What does the root of the word kesef? It's also translated as silver, but it also means money. The root of the word kesef is desire, because that's what people desire. They desire money, and the more money you have, the more you desire. But that's not only true in the physical realm, it's true in the spiritual realm. The more Torah you study, the more attention you give to your Torah study, the more you delve into it, the more you argue, and you're so excited about learning. That's why you argue about it. Why would you argue? Who argues about the weather? Does anyone argue, well, it's 85 degrees, it's very hot? No, it's not very hot. You don't see people arguing about it. We all agree on the weather. Some people are argumentative by nature, so they'll argue about anything, but the average person doesn't argue about weather. You only argue about things that are important to you. You argue about politics, you argue about religion, because it's important. If it's not important, you don't argue about religion. It's irrelevant to you. So when people argue about Torah, that means that they live with it, they thrive on it, and they're excited about it. And that's the more kesef, the more desire you will get when you study Torah with others in a context of involvement and enthusiasm. The next one is, the negative one is, the more wives, the more witchcraft. What's the parallel to that? The more counsel, The other one, the positive one was before, the more sitting, the more wisdom, the more counsel, the more understanding. On one hand, having many wives is a negative, and we know that from history. In Hebrew,
Are you positive?
in Hebrew, what's the word for a co-wife? A co-wife. If your husband has another wife besides you, what's your relationship? What is it called? It's not a sister.
Wife-in-law.
Bigamy.
What?
Wife-in-law.
It's called tzara. What does that word mean? Tzara is misfortune, trouble. Right. It's a. You should have come last time we did this. So it's not good news, because they're going to be rivals. They're going to be fighting with each other. They're going to show. They're going to try to use devious means of getting ahead of the other and getting their husbands to treat them with more money and more of whatever, more affection. It's not a good thing. It's a very unhealthy thing. So even when Judaism didn't ban polygamy, it was never something encouraged. It was always discouraged. And there are a few notable exceptions, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. So when you have many wives, it's not good advice for you. It's terrible advice. You're getting the wrong influence, the wrong messages. But if you have one wife, your wife is your counsel. She's the one who gives you advice. She's the one who knows how to discriminate. She's the one who knows how to reject the negative and embrace the positive. And where do we find this? We find this in the Torah with Sarah. Abraham was one of the holiest people that ever lived. And what does God say to Abraham? Listen to whatever Sarah tells you. Why? Because she was able to discriminate. She knew that Yishmael was a bad influence, and it was not a healthy thing to have him in the house. That she was the one who discriminated in a positive way. She knew exactly how to give counsel to their husband. I mentioned this several times, that the Talmud says that Abraham studied the Torah. He knew the Torah even though it hadn't been given yet. How did he know the Torah? So the Midrash says his kidneys taught him Torah. How do kidneys teach you Torah? Kidneys. Right. So the Midrash says, the explanation I think is, kidneys are a filter. Abraham was able to intuit Torah knowledge by looking at nature. The Talmud says if Torah had not been given, we would learn morality from animals. And it gives examples of the cat and the ant and so on. But if you learn from nature, you could learn bad things as well. You have to have the ability to discriminate. You have to have a filter. Abraham had that filter. Who was that filter? Sarah. Sarah was Abraham's filter. That's what a good wife is. That she is the one who gives you counsel, and that's how you get more understanding. The Hebrew word for understanding here is tavuna. Tavuna is translated as understanding, like the word bina, and the Talmud says bina was given to women more than it is to men. Well, men might have certain intellectual qualities. We won't go into what they are. We'll try to figure them out one day. But women are endowed with more bina. Bina is usually interpreted as understanding something from something else. If you tell a man something, he will not draw the inferences from it. If the window is open in the middle of the winter and your wife says it's freezing outside, he says, so what do you want me to do? I'm having problems with the men. Okay. So men will not draw inferences the same way that a woman. She has much more understanding and can build on that. Just knowing one piece of information, she could learn another piece of information that may not be self-evident.
That's intuition.
That's what intuition is as well. She can pick up things that a man would not be able to pick up. Generally speaking, there are men who have more of that intellectual asset more than women, and the women who have more of something else that men have. But we're generalizing here, of course. So when you have the right woman, as opposed to having many wives, which means that you're not interested in getting good advice from anyone, you're interested in your pleasure and your conveniences. But when you have one wife, a loyal wife, then you have counsel and understanding. And then he goes on. The next one was, if you increase the female slaves,
There's more lewdness.
the more lewdness. And what's the parallel to that? The parallel to that, the next one is, if you increase tzedakah, you increase peace.
Charity.
Now, what is the reason why someone might want to have more wives? More wives because they want to have more children. And in order to take care of the children, they need more maids. So you think you're doing an act of charity by bringing more children into the world, but when you give more charity, that's where you really achieve more peace, because if you have many maidservants in the house, you're not going to have peace. And then the final thing is, if the final one was more male servants, you have more theft. When a person has more slaves, it increases their estate. They're going to be recognized as being wealthy. They can even afford to hire slaves. But that doesn't give you a good name. Just because you're wealthy, just because you have so many assets, does not equate with having a good name. Look at the billionaires in the world today and how people talk about them. You know, they can be filthy rich with hundreds of billions of dollars, and they're the butt of so many jokes and so many criticisms. You get a good name only through Torah.
Jealousy too.
Whatever the reason is,
Bad people.
whatever the reason is, but when a person excels in the study of Torah, and they get a good name, no one's going to knock them because they have a lot of Torah study.
Because you're rich doesn't mean you cannot study Torah.
No, it doesn't mean that. We're talking about someone who focuses on it. That's okay. Let's go into each one separately. When you increase the more flesh, the more worms. What does that mean? Physically, it means, and the simple meaning is, that when a person dies, their body decomposes and they become food for the worms. So the more flesh you have, it doesn't enhance you. It ends up becoming part of the food for the worm. According to the Barbanel, it's based on a passage in the Talmud, that when the body is decomposing and the worms eat it, it's painful for the soul. The soul feels pain that the body is going through this decomposition, and the more the body has to go through it, the more painful it is for the soul. But it also could have another meaning. The word in Hebrew for a worm is rima. Rima also has a meaning of deception. The more you consume in the physical sense, the more deceived you become. The more you think that you're getting something of value, and it's not really value, it's actually going to harm you. Anything in excess in the physical realm is deceptive because it's appealing. What does Madison Avenue rely on? It relies on deceiving people. The whole idea of advertising is one big exercise in deception. There was a question that was asked in a class of Jewish business ethics about to what extent are you allowed to advertise things. One example given was I think they'll no longer do this, but Folgers Coffee used to advertise mountain-grown coffee. So people would want to get, if it's mountain-grown, it's special, but all coffee is mountain-grown. So it's deception, but it's
different from anyone.
So, are you allowed to do that? And probably the answer is no. But that's what advertising relies on. It relies on focusing your attention on something that's not really the truth, or it's an exaggeration.
And even today, they will write no cholesterol on something that is a plant product.
Right.
There isn't a single plant on earth that produces cholesterol.
Okay,
So
I would
nothing.
I would sell vodka saying there's no cholesterol, no sodium, no what else people avoid having now these days. What?
No sugar.
No sugar. No, it has calories, but it's not doesn't make it into a health food. But that's how they try to advertise. They try to deceive you. So the more you eat, the more deceived you become. And not just eating, anything that's in the material world, the more of it depends on deception. It deceives you into thinking that you're getting a benefit. Now here the emphasis is on indulging. It's not telling you shouldn't eat, or eating is not a good thing. Obviously, you can't live without eating, and it becomes a positive thing if it's done the right way. But pursuit of pleasure brings disillusionment. You think you're going to be better off, and in truth, you're worse off. On a little bit of a deeper level, we are required to eat in order to live. A person cannot say, I'm not going to eat, because that's committing suicide, and you're not allowed to take your own life. You're not allowed to hurt yourself. It's against the Torah for a person to punch himself in the nose, or to say to someone else, you can punch me in my nose, or you can punch me in my stomach. No, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to injure yourself. You have no rights over your own body. The cliche that people said, it's my body and it's there for my right to do whatever I want with my body, is totally against Jewish law and Jewish principles of ethics. Your body is on lease. God leases the body to us, and He gives us certain rights, what we can do with our body. You can even engage in risky behavior if it's the only way you can make a living. The Talmud uses the example of climbing high trees in order to collect the fruits. If that's how you earn a living, you can do that. Jacob, when he boasts about how hard he worked, he says, how I worked day and night in the freezing cold. So you have that right to abuse your body to some extent, but you can't arbitrarily abuse your body. So you have to eat. But eating is much more than just surviving. Eating in Judaism is a spiritual activity as well. If the food you eat is kosher, and you recite a blessing before and after eating it, and you use the energy to do a mitzvah, that food becomes a spiritual source of energy, and it becomes positive, and that justifies us destroying other forms of life. Why do we have a right to eat meat? What gives us a right to take the life of an animal? And the answer is no, we don't have a right to take the life of an animal. The only reason that we could eat meat is because the animal is becoming elevated into a human, and the human is elevated into God. We're elevating ourselves to get closer to God. That's what the Hebrew word for sacrifice is, korban. Korban comes from the root karov, close. You're bringing the animal closer to God. And by the same token, if you eat a vegetable, if you're a vegetarian, you eat only vegetables, you only eat fruits. What gives us a right to destroy, to take the life of a leaf? If someone is walking down the street and they pluck a leaf off a tree, that's wrong. Why would you pluck a leaf and destroy that leaf? Unless you want to prune the tree, then you're doing it for the benefit of the tree. But just to destroy any form of life, there's no crime of plucking a leaf, but it's still against Jewish ethics. Why? Because why should we destroy any form of life? But if that enhances our life and our spiritual life, then not only do we have a right to do it, it becomes a positive act, a mitzvah, because we're elevating it. We'll talk more about sacrifices on Sunday when we talk about the Beit HaMikdash, that we're praying for its rebuilding. So we have a right to eat an animal because we have the power to elevate that animal. But if we don't have that, if we don't do that exercise in elevation, then we have no right to kill the animal. The animal has a right to tell us, who are you to take my life, or who are you to eat me? So what happens when a person dies? The animal eats us. The worms eat us. Because when we're alive, we have a right to eat the animal because we could elevate the animal. But once we're no longer here and we no longer have that mission and that capability, then the animal could eat us. That's what the Mishnah is trying to tell us, that if you increase your flesh, you you come to a point, you don't have to wait till the person is no longer alive, they're in their grave. Even when they're alive, the worm has a right to eat you rather than you eating the meat. Okay, and then when you have increase your nechasim, the Hebrew word is nechasim, your property. The more property, the more anxiety. What's the reason for the anxiety? You're worried about thieves. You're worried about economic upheavals. You're worried about, now we could be worried about pandemics. You could be a multi-millionaire, a billionaire, or you could lose it all in 1 minute. There's a story told about this Jew living somewhere in Europe at the times when Jews were under the control of the Christian leaders, and he was a very wealthy Jew. And in his prayers, there's a point where you say that, God, you can do everything. You could make someone rich poor and someone poor rich. And he thought to himself, how could God make me poor? I'm so wealthy, I have so many properties, I have real estate, I own ships, I own timber, I own agriculture. He was like diversified in so many areas. He says, if God would want to make me poor, he'd have to bring a hurricane and it would destroy all my ships, and then he would have to do something else to destroy my oil. And it would take weeks or months or years for me to become poor. And he's so engrossed in his thoughts that he's walking home from the synagogue and he walks into a street where the monastery was, and Jews were not allowed to walk there. But it was too late, he couldn't escape, and he was imprisoned, and he was told that he has to convert to Christianity. He says, absolutely not. They said, well, if either you convert or you sign a document that you're handing over all your wealth to the church. Otherwise, we will not let you out of here alive. And he signs on the dotted line. And then he realized in a few seconds, he gave away all his wealth. All his billions were now no longer his. And he's walking home from the synagogue now, and he's thinking to himself, but it says God can make someone poor rich as well. How? That's impossible. He said, to make me poor, that was possible. To make me rich again, I would have to borrow money, and I would have to invest and make a little profit and make another investment, and that would take months or years before I would get back on my feet. How could God make me rich again? And all of a sudden it started to become very cloudy, and the rain starts pouring down, and lightning starts coming, and the lightning hits the monastery. Within a few minutes, the whole place was engulfed in flames. And the contract which he signed to give over all his assets was destroyed. And he's back again to being this multi-billionaire. So,
what is my money? What is my property?
Right. So you could lose everything, and that's what people are anxious about, because wealth, it says wealth is like a cycle, a wheel of fortune. So one day you could be a multi-billionaire, the next day you could become a pauper, and vice versa. So people are worried about how they could lose everything. But there's another thing called Pizur HaNefesh. The commentaries talk about Pizur HaNefesh is scattered soul. The more you have, the more scattered you are. You have to think about all your different assets, all your different sources of income. and your mind is scattered all over the place. Once a wealthy man was trying to impress his wealth on a poor man. He brings him into his mansion and he shows him there's one room for eating, another room for cooking, another room for resting, another room for sleeping, another room for entertaining guests. What?
Visiting.
For visiting. He went down to all these rooms. And the poor man looks at him and says, I feel so sorry for you. I have one room. My life is perfect. I don't have to go be scattered all over the place. My mind can be focused on everything in one room. I feel so much more at peace than you living in this huge mansion where you could get lost in it. Another problem with possessions, I alluded to it before, it says when a person has 100, he wants 200. When a person has 200, how much does he want?
400.
Not 300, but it grows to 400. When you have 400, you don't want 600, you want 800. It grows exponentially. And you never can get what you want. Not only, the more you have, the more elusive the amount that you would want becomes, because you're never going to get that amount, because as soon as you get it, you want much more. You're never happy. That's why in Ethics of the Fathers later on it says, who is a truly rich person? Hasameach bechelko, someone who is happy with his lot. Now, everything can be turned and converted into an asset if your focus on your money is using it for charity, for helping others, supporting Torah, supporting the ability for people to do mitzvahs. When you use your money for positive things, then that becomes a spiritual asset, and that brings you joy and happiness. The Hebrew word for property is nechasim, and the root of that word is covered up. So one explanation is that our property covers up our real value. Our value is never measured by our money or by our possessions. Our value is always measured by what kind of a person we are. If we're moral, if we're decent, if we're kind. So you can have all this property and people measure you by your property. Wow, this man is so rich. No, that's not who he is. And sometimes it covers up the negative. Sometimes people use their wealth to show off how good they are, how great they are, but really they're not such nice people. Another interpretation given to the word nechasim, it comes from a root that means to enter. Nichnasin, when you enter into something, that means they go in of wealth and out of wealth. It's never static, it's never in the same place. And there's an Aramaic meaning of the word nechasim, which comes from a word in Aramaic which means to slaughter. That your property devaluates. There are some exceptions where property becomes, and real estate goes up, but most property that you have, with passage of time, devaluates. It slaughters. It loses its value, and that's what makes people very, very unhappy and very anxious, because they know their property, their possessions could devaluate. You can be invested in the stock market one day, and the next day you lose everything. Another word for one kind of coinage is zuzim. Zuzim. Zuzim also means it moves. The wealth moves from one person to another, from one place to another. How do you protect that from happening? Well, there's a mitzvah that also has the two zuz in it. Mezuzah. When you have a mezuzah on your doorpost, that's not the reason why we have a mezuzah, but it also has that benefit. It protects the home and its possessions. Reminds me of, I think I told this story a few weeks ago. This priest sees this rabbi, he's friendly with the rabbi, and he says to the rabbi, he said, we live in the same neighborhood, and I've experienced break-ins to my house almost every day. Someone breaks into my house and steals my stuff, and I understand that you don't have that problem. What's the secret? The rabbi points to the mezuzah. He says, oh, can I put a mezuzah on my doorpost? The rabbi says, yes, sure, you could. I'm not going to go into whether that's true or not, but this is the way the joke goes. So he puts up a mezuzah, and then he sees the rabbi a week later, and the rabbi says, well, did it work? He says, yes, it worked, and no more thieves. But I have a bunch of charity collectors coming to my house because of the mezuzah. So it may protect the house from thieves, but it also helps you give more tzedakah. More charity collectors, more tzedakah. And one final thing, there's another word in Hebrew for money, ma'ot. Ma'ot, the root of that word is the same as me'etlet. Me'etlet means a 24-hour period. That your money lasts for 24 hours, and it may not be have any value anymore. It also relates to a root which means crooked. It could go astray. The money could just disappear. So you would think that Judaism is against wealth. Judaism is not against wealth. Judaism does not denigrate you because you're wealthy. In some cultures, wealthy people are denigrated because of their wealth. In Judaism, they're not. Not only that, but the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, the compiler of the Mishnah, would honor rich people. Why would he honor rich people? Because the fact that they have wealth means that God trusts them, that they will meet all of the tests, pass all the challenges, that they'll know how to use the money the right way, that they won't let it go to their heads and become arrogant, which might be the case otherwise. In other words, when God gives you a challenge, God is telling you, you have the ability to meet that challenge. So he would honor these people because he saw the potential they had to meet the challenge of wealth, and by honoring them, it would help them express their talent and actualize their talent and their ability to do the right thing.
Do I have this story correct that the Rebbe used to, one time met a group of developmentally disabled or disabled people and said, you are not the Me'ochad, especially with the Mitsuyan. Is that correct? Correct understanding?
Right. He was talking to, soldiers of the Yom Kippur War who were all injured and disabled, missing legs and hands and really in very bad shape. And the Hebrew term for that is nechei. The nechei would be translated as crippled. And the Rebbe says, you're not nechei, you're mitsuyanim, you're distinguished members of the community, because you have challenges and you have the ability to meet those challenges. That means God gave you special powers that no one else has. So but it's true also for people who are wealthy, that they have special challenges, and to do business with integrity is one of the challenges, to share their wealth with others. And if they have that challenge, that means they have the ability to meet the challenge and pass all the tests. But if you think about it, what's wrong with wealth is not the wealth itself, it's what you have in mind with that wealth. If your whole purpose of wealth is to accumulate more, what is the purpose? What's the objective? And I'm going to read a joke that's I can't remember all the details. An investment banker was on the pier of a little coastal village when a small boat with just one fisherman docked. His boat was full of beautiful yellow tuna. The banker complimented the fisherman on his catch, asking how long it had taken him. Oh, only a short time. Why don't you stay longer? I have enough fish to feed my family. He says, what do you do the rest of the time? I sleep late, I fish a little, play with my children, take a nap, stroll into the village in the evening, be with my friends, play my guitar. I have a full and busy life. The banker was not impressed. I have a Harvard MBA and I could help you. You should spend more time fishing, and with the proceeds buy a larger boat, and from those increased proceeds you could buy several boats and soon have a fleet. Instead of selling your fish to a middleman, you could control production, processing, and distribution by building your own cannery. You could leave the small coastal village and move to the city, then to New York, where you could run your expanding enterprise. The fisherman asked, how long will this take? Oh, 10 to 20 years. But what then? Well, next you would announce an IPO and sell your stock to the public, making millions and millions. Then you could retire to a small coastal village where you could sleep late, fish a little, play with your children, take a nap, and stroll to the village in the evenings, be with your friends, and play your guitar. That's what happens when your focus is on just accumulating wealth. What for? What's the point? So you do it for the children. And what do the children do? They do the same thing. They follow their parents. They do the same thing as their parents. And they're doing it for their children. And the people are still looking for the child for whom everyone is working.
I don't think it works for everybody.
Anymore.
Right.
I already told my kids.
Ellie, בקול רם.
אני אמרתי, לא בכל משפחה זה ככה.
So what's the antidote for increasing in your properties, in your wealth, with the increases on, the focus is on quantity? You have to draw a parallel, and by assiduous Torah study, where you focus on quality. The problem is quantity when it comes to physical matters. You have to combat with quality. Superficial Torah study gives you life, but when you have deep Torah study, involved Torah study, lively Torah study, exciting Torah study, that gives you the quality of life. There's no greater quality than there can be with getting involved in a Torah study. There's no greater pleasure than Torah study. You ask the people who are steeped in Torah study, they consider it to be the greatest pleasure. They can't get enough of it. There was a rabbi that actually he lived in Buffalo, and he knew this other rabbi. So I think that's where I got it from, a rabbi who got it from a rabbi who got it from a rabbi, who was very ill for a few weeks, and he was laid up in bed and he couldn't do anything. And then finally, when the doctor let him get out of bed, he opened up a volume of the Talmud and he put his head in it like he was drinking water, had not drunk water in weeks. And the pleasure with which he studied the Torah, it was like he couldn't get enough of it. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, on Yom Kippur, this is close to the end of his life, he was very weak and sick, but he fasted the whole Yom Kippur, and after the fast was over, he said, I am so thirsty. And his family was very concerned for his health, so they ran to the kitchen, they got him a glass of water, they put it down, and he was studying Talmud. And an hour later, he says, I'm so thirsty, and they ran to the kitchen, they brought a glass of water, but the first glass wasn't touched. And this happened throughout the night. I'm so thirsty. And they just loaded up a whole bunch of glasses of water. He didn't break the fast, he didn't have anything to drink. In the morning, they asked him what happened. He says, Yom Kippur is a day of prayer. So I couldn't study Torah the whole 24 hours of Yom Kippur. I became so thirsty to study Torah that I opened up a volume of the Talmud that deals with the laws of the Sukkah. It's a 110 pages approximately of really intricate material, and I couldn't get enough of it. I was just so thirsty, and now in the morning I finished the tractate. Now I can break the fast. So he didn't even feel his thirst, his physical hunger, because he was just so steeped in Torah. That's the real wealth that a Jew can possibly have. And even though we can't be Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, but each in our own way should treasure the moments that we study Torah and get excited about it, not just do it because, it's an obligation, not just because I like it, but you have to really learn to develop this tremendous thirst for it. And you can't bear being without it.